Hello everyone, this is Blake, and I want to welcome you to the very first ever video after action report that I have done. So I frequently do customized multiplayer games for my friends around the club, and they've always been very popular, and I've always written up these after action reports in the past, but this time I want to take it a step further and try to find another way to present this information just for entertainment purposes. So you're probably wondering, just what is a double-blind multiplayer game? Well, a double-blind multiplayer game is a customized scenario where neither side has access to the game file before play starts. And this makes it impossible to know the starting locations, arrival times, or even the numbers of your opponents when the game begins. And this makes it extremely difficult to play these games, but also a lot of fun. So in this game, I've got some of my favorite people in the club playing. I've got Paul, Mike, and Ash for the Confederate side of this game. And on the Federal side, Kyle, Carl, and Rick. Anytime I create a multiplayer game, I like to have a backstory as to why the two armies are doing what they're doing. This just seems natural. In this backstory, I wanted to take the Second Manassas campaign and change everything around with just a little bit. So in my scenario, Jackson and Banks do not come to blows at Cedar Mountain. The battle never occurs. And this causes Robert E. Lee to reevaluate Stonewall Jackson, who had performed very poorly on the peninsula. So he divides his army into 3 corps instead of just 2, and gives 1 corps to A.P. Hill, who had performed very well on the peninsula. So this revamped Army of Northern Virginia is moving north to attack Pope and threaten Washington. Pope falls back quickly, and he is joined by units from McClellan's army as they arrive back from the peninsula. His numbers begin to swell, and he decides he wants to attack Lee and grab the initiative. The two armies then are marching towards one another, and on August 30th, they are going to make contact around the Bull Run Mountains. The map I am using is on the right-hand side of the screen there. It is the Aldie map from the Gettysburg game, and I am using a customized order of battle from the Second Manassas campaign, which is located on the Antietam disc. Alright, well let's go ahead and get started here, and begin by looking at the general rules of the game. The optional rules are on the screen there in front of you. Nothing really out of the ordinary here, except for maybe night movement fatigue being turned off. There are only a few turns of night in the very beginning of the game, and so I decided to let everyone move freely. And since there are so few night turns, there are no night rules in this game. We did implement a house rule of 8 guns per hex, and this is a 62-turn game overall. It takes place over one very long day from 2 a.m. all the way until, I believe, midnight of that day. Communication rules. I love communication rules. I don't enjoy having everyone be able to talk on each and every turn about anything that they want. And so to make it a little bit harder for everyone, I created a few simple rules. So teams can only communicate with each other during designated turns. These turns occur at the top of every odd hour of gameplay. So 5 a.m., 7 a.m., 9 a.m., you can talk as much as you like. Another thing that I do in my games is I allow everyone to choose their own setup at the very beginning. And how I do that is I present each team with 4 pre-made setups that they can choose from. And this allows each team more control over their own strategy than in a traditional scenario where you go in using whatever pre-established plan was already set. So how do you win your game? Well, you can defeat your enemy militarily, and this entails simply inflicting heavy losses on them to the point where they can no longer continue to function as a cohesive unit. How does that work exactly? At what point do I throw in the towel and say it's over? Well, each side has a preset point limit that they cannot cross, or the enemy will gain the victory automatically. And in this game, the point limit for the two sides is 10,000 for the Federals and 8,200 for the Confederates. You're probably wondering, what am I talking about with points? Well, very simple. If you look here, this is your usual victory dialogue screen. And on the right-hand side, you have infantry point loss, cavalry point loss, and so forth that you're used to seeing. And we simply add those up. So the infantry, cavalry, artillery, supply, and leader points all added up for their own side. And if you cross the threshold that you are allowed, your opponent will automatically win the game. So how does this look as far as points go? Well, if you lose 13,000 infantry, that's 5,200 points. 2,000 cavalry equals 1,600 points. And you can kind of see there how all these will add up over time. So both sides have an idea of roughly how many men they can lose in the battle. Obviously, you want to minimize cavalry and artillery losses because those are really going to hurt you. The other way that you can win the game is to defeat your enemy by maneuvering. And this entails taking preset objectives and forcing the enemy to fall back rather than trying to defend an untenable position. And we're going to talk more about this in just a second. Let's look at the battlefield map as well. So here is the Aldie map from the game of Gettysburg. And as mentioned before, I'm using the OOBs from 2nd Manassas. All right, I mentioned before that you can defeat your enemy by maneuvering. So let's take a look at how that works. On the southern part of the map here, you will see 3 objectives circled in red. Those are the Confederate objectives that they must defend. The Federals can win this game by taking 2 of these rebel-held objectives at any point in the battle. If they do that, the game comes to an end and they win by maneuvering. They can also simply take Georgetown, which is the main Confederate base. This triggers an immediate defeat for the Confederates, and the game comes to an end. On the other side of the map, the Yankees have 3 objectives which they must hold, and the rebels can win by taking 2 of these Union-held objectives at any point during the battle, or by taking Aldie, which is the main Union supply base. Let's take a look now at the order of battle for each side. You can see here the Army of Northern Virginia is composed of 51,000 men overall, roughly 42,000 infantry, 4,300 artillerymen with 173 cannon, and about 5,000 cavalrymen. In this game, Paul is going to command Lee and Longstreet, Ash is going to command Jackson and Stuart, and Mike is going to command A.P. Hill's forces. On the other side, the Army of Virginia, commanded by Pope, has 65,000 men, 54,000 infantry, 5,000 artillerymen with 200 cannon, and 6,000 cavalrymen. Kyle is going to play as Pope and Sigel, whereas Carl will be McDowell and Buford, and Rick will play as Banks. I mentioned earlier that I would allow each side 4 different options as to how the game would be set up. So let's begin by taking a look at the Confederate options that they were presented with. The first was the flanking option. This would take Jackson and Hill and send them to the west and have them enter the board from that direction, while Longstreet entered the board from the south. Option number 2 was the right flank attack. This would take Jackson and Hill from the southeast and Longstreet from the south, and they would move northward. The third option was a balanced attack. This would take Longstreet, Hill, and Jackson and spread them out on the southern part of the map as they advanced northward. The final option was the left flank attack. This would have all 3 Confederate corps enter the map from the southwest. The Confederates then were allowed a discussion period in which to choose which of the 4 plans they wanted to go with. Lee began the conversation by saying that I would be reluctant to split our force as they are sure to have greater numbers than us. My hope is that they split their force and we can then decide which Yankee force to pick on and destroy. Lee stated that he favored a strong approach west of the mountains with the aim of capturing Middleburg and then turning east towards Aldie. A diversionary force would be launched at Gilbert's Corner to keep the Yankees unbalanced and unsure of their intentions. And this seemed to point towards plan number 3, where you had Longstreet, Hill, and Jackson advancing northward over 3 separate roads. But more discussion followed. A.P. Hill then proposed an alternative strategy of attacking with the greatest force possible east of the mountains and driving north towards Gilbert's Corner. A diversionary force would be advanced in the west on the other side of the Bull Run Mountains. If successful at Gilbert's Corner, we could then swing around and attack Aldie from the northeast. The western force would then be able to threaten Middleburg from the south and leave open the option of taking both Middleburg and Gilbert's Corner. This would win the battle for us. And this pointed towards plan number 2 instead of plan number 3. And then, finally, Jackson stated his views. Jackson said that he felt the Federals were unlikely to think offensively, and that their best opportunity was to attack them and drive them from the field. Jackson supported the idea of aiming their army towards both Middleburg and Gilbert's Corner as a way to force Pope to retreat from Aldie. Given the eastern part of the battlefield is narrow, only one road, I think it is better to centralize infantry to attack Gilbert's Corner and cavalry to detect and threaten Middleburg with infantry support. The Confederates continued to discuss it for a little while, and in the end, their plan ended up being plan number 2. And this would be their strategy. Stuart was to divide his force, with one brigade accompanying Jackson to the north along the Braddock Road, while the other 2 moved to the west. Jackson would lead the advance on Gilbert's Corner with A.P. Hill in support if needed. Longstreet is to attack towards Middleburg and then turn towards Aldie if he is able to take Middleburg. A.P. Hill has a contingency plan. He is either to follow Jackson directly north along the Braddock Road, or if that road is blocked, he is to turn west and reinforce Longstreet for his attack on Aldie. And really, everything behind this plan is aggressiveness. The Confederates want to take the initiative right at the very beginning and drive on the Federal force. Lee stated this at the very start. Although we need to be cautious, I don't expect to see any Union units for most of the morning, as they will be too busy digging in the dirt. If it turns out we face impossible odds, we'll shift to the defense. Let's take a look at the Union options now. They are also presented with 4 different plans. The first is a balanced attack, with Banks, McDowell, and Sigel advancing across the northern part of the map. Option number 2 is a left flank attack, with McDowell, Sigel, and Buford's cavalry coming in from the northeast and Banks from the north. The third option is the right flank attack. This will mass Banks, Sigel, and McDowell coming in from the northwest. Lastly, a balanced attack with cavalry on the left flank. This would have Banks and Sigel coming in from the north and McDowell from the northeast, with Buford screening his advance. The Union side then began a long discussion trying to figure out which of these 4 plans they wanted to go with. Pope began by stating that he favored advancing as far as Ashby's Gap Pike, where the army would move into a defensive alignment and defend the towns of Middleburg and Aldie from a rebel attack. And this would point towards plan number 3, which was a concentrated advance coming in from the northwest. The discussion went on, though, and McDowell disagreed. He felt a more aggressive approach was needed in order to give them ample warning of any rebel offensive heading their way so they could react accordingly. After having determined the rebel advance plan, we may then feed forward sufficient forces from our defensive lines to constantly harass, interdict, and inflict casualties on them whilst utilizing our interior lines of communication and movement. Banks stated that the rebel commanders whom he had fought in the past were all aggressive to the point of recklessness and would surely be spoiling for an offensive battle. We need to strike a fine balance between not being overly aggressive, yet not just simply waiting for their attack, which would feed right into their grabbing the momentum. Banks then proposed following plan number 2, in which the largest force would be in the east, driving down the Braddock Road. After preparing a strong defensive position around Aldie and Gilbert's Corner, we should send a corps and the majority of our cavalry down the Braddock Road towards Haymarket. If the Rebs send their main attack force up the Braddock Road, a full corps with cavalry should be able to delay them and make them pay as they try to reach Aldie. If not, then our attack force can surprise them elsewhere. So this was a much different plan than the one that Pope was suggesting earlier, which was mainly defensive based. Well, the discussion went on for a little while, and McDowell supported the idea of Banks as being a good mix of aggressive offensive action in the east and defensive positioning in the west. But Pope has some reservations about the plan still. I am worried about defending Gilbert's Corner and Aldie because of the river between them. There are only 3 crossings which will connect the 2 flanks and allow for mutual support. We run the risk of the flanks getting isolated and destroyed. Pope also realized that Middleburg would have to be abandoned in order to fully defend Aldie and Gilbert's Corner. However, Pope saw also that this plan had its benefits. Sometimes a good defense is a good offense, and the federal offensive-defensive plan would surely be able to keep the rebels off balance and unable to capture their base at Aldie. So they ended up going with plan number 2. And they developed a strategy that looks like this. Buford would lead the advance on the Braddock Road with 2 brigades while he sent 1 to the west. McDowell would move south on Braddock Road towards Haymarket. Banks would move to Middleburg and then turn east to Aldie and build defenses there. Sigel was to move to Gilbert's Corner to support either McDowell or Banks as circumstances arose. Banks then told everyone that we cannot allow ourselves to be cowered by the Confederate generals. I say enough of that. We must meet their boldness and aggression with our own. It is now time for my unasked for 2 cents about the plans that both sides have chosen for this battle. Looking at the overhead map from above, the first thing that you should notice is how many north-south roads there are in the west versus the east. There's also a lot more open land in the west as opposed to the east, where you are bordered by the Bull Run Mountains on one side and the edge of the board on the other. And that brings me directly to my first point of why are they going to the east? It doesn't make any sense. Both sides have opted to go directly along the Braddock Road in order to march across the board. By doing this, you limit your maneuverability to the point of practically nothing. Once they make contact, their armies are going to be bogged down along this road with no way to move except for forward or backwards. It's going to be very interesting along the Braddock Road. My next point is that Buford is being wasted. The Union plan calls for Buford to send 2 brigades along the Braddock Road and 1 brigade to the west. That should be reversed. You should not send 2 brigades along a single road. At the most, maybe a brigade. Ideally, maybe even less than that, maybe a regiment or 2. When you're only moving along one road, there's not a lot that you can explore or do. Once you make contact with the enemy and find out what their location is, your job is done and it's time for the infantry to take over. And that's going to be a problem for the federal side because they're going to have so many cavalrymen out in front of the infantry. That is something to watch. And in the west, if you're trying to get by with just 1 brigade, trying to cover all of those roads and square miles, it's going to be incredibly difficult to screen Middleburg and Banks's force. Sigel is doing what exactly? His orders are to come down to Gilbert's Corner and build a defensive line facing south behind McDowell. I don't really understand this at all. McDowell is moving on the Braddock Road. If the Confederates are able to plow through McDowell, I really don't think Sigel is going to be able to stop them. It would seem to make more sense to use Sigel either in an offensive capacity, really anywhere else on the board, or to just move directly to Aldie and begin building defenses there, and then link up with Banks somewhere in that vicinity. It's much easier to move from Aldie back to Gilbert's Corner if you needed to, than to move from Gilbert's Corner, spend all that time building defenses there, just to rush to Aldie in case of an emergency. Banks's flank. So the Union plan calls for Banks's corps to move to Middleburg and then to Aldie, and build a defensive line somewhere in this area here. There is a very glaring problem with this idea. Chiefly that if the Confederates are able to move up to Middleburg, that they have a perfect opportunity to just simply outflank Aldie and come in from the northwest. And if that happens, I don't really see how Banks can stop them. He would have to swing back directly in front of Aldie and defend practically in the streets of the town with no margin for error. And that is a very, very dangerous thing when dealing with the Confederate army who is successfully moved across the map. Lastly, initiative. The initiative in this battle is all with the rebels. At least that's the way it feels even before we started. The Confederate plan is very offensive in nature. They're trying to find ways to take it to the Federals, whereas the Federal plan seems to be all defensive in nature and reactionary. Usually in these battles, whichever side has the initiative and the more proactive plan is more successful. We'll see how that plays out though in this battle. How this video turn-by-turn commentary will work, I have no idea. I've never done it before, so we are going to figure it out as we go along. We will go over a set number of turns in each episode of this series and look at how the two armies are moving and fighting the battle. You can expect some commentary from me, some live action videos, and lots of overhead maps as we go along. And you know what? Hopefully it's amusing, you guys enjoy it, and we just have some fun. Alright, let's go ahead and begin. This is the same map that you saw just a moment ago. All of the units are listed on this map, and this is turn number 1 in the game. And I actually skip this turn in my multiplayer games. I use it as an administrative turn to set the passwords for both sides. On the map, you're going to notice that all of the units move as we move from turn to turn. So as I flip to turn number 2 here, if you keep an eye on the units, you will see them move across the map. And there you go. So this is the first turn of the game that the players have played. This is the 2 a.m. night turn. On the left-hand side with each turn, you're going to see the total strength of the two armies. And on the right-hand side, you're going to see the points that both sides have lost, and whether they came from infantry, cavalry, or whatever. On the map, Robertson has headed north with his brigade, while Stuart has led the other two brigades of his division to the west towards Longstreet's corps. In the north, it's the exact opposite. Farnsworth has moved to the west with one brigade of Federal cavalry, while Buford has led two Federal cavalry brigades to the south along the Braddock Road. So flipping now to the next turn, you're going to see all these units move once more. And we are at the 2:30 a.m. turn now. This is the end of turn number 3. The strength of the two armies has gone up just a little bit. And you will notice here that the two cavalry forces are approaching one another. Bayard and Robertson's brigade are on a collision course, and it should occur next turn. Speaking of cavalry, Beardsley's brigade, where are they going? I don't know. When I watch these games, I sometimes scratch my head and try to figure out what the players are thinking, and this is one of those times I can't. Beardsley's going down a one-way street towards the edge of the board, and I don't know why. It would make much more sense if he was in direct support of Bayard, because maybe they could get the jump on Robertson, but instead, Beardsley's heading over towards goodness knows where. All right, now skipping ahead to the next turn, we're going to see all the units on the map move once more, and there you go. So we are at the end of the 3 a.m. turn, and you will notice that Bayard and Robertson have made contact along the Braddock Road, and that the first losses of the game have occurred. In this game, I gave each side a number of 10-man cavalry scouting units, and those were the first units to make contact along the Braddock Road. And the Confederates are a bit concerned here. Jackson wrote Lee that, "We will know more at sunup, but I think I can handle this. The only danger is if there were 2,000 plus Union cavalry attacking me at any cost, aggressively, firmly, and immediately." Robertson's is the smallest of the Confederate cavalry brigades, and he doesn't know what he has ran into in the darkness of night. And, if Bayard was more aggressive, or if he had Beardsley directly behind him in support, there's always a chance that they could get the jump on Robertson and capture hundreds of Confederate cavalrymen even before the sun comes up. But with Beardsley way over here, out of position, that's not going to happen. Baird is left to try to figure out what's going on in the darkness by himself, and I don't believe he's going to be too aggressive not being able to see around him along just a single Braddock road. Down in the south, Anderson's brigade is being left at Georgetown. They are going to garrison that as it is the Confederates' main supply base. All right, so now we're going to move ahead to the next turn. You're going to see all the units move on the map once more. And there we go. 3:30 a.m. now. This is the last full turn of nighttime. You will notice that Baird has fallen back, and this is a good move. Baird did not know what he ran into in the darkness, and rather than rushing forward and risking goodness knows what, he's decided to fall back to a better position. And this has also brought him closer to Beardsley, which is now moving across the fields to reach Baird. Really, they should have already been on that road behind him directly, but they're making up for it quickly. So this was a conservative move, but it was the right move to make. And on the Confederate side, same thing, a conservative move. Robertson held his ground. He did not chase after the retreating Federal forces. He decided to go into line and wait until the sun comes up to get a better idea of what he's up against. So both sides have made intelligent cavalry moves here along the Braddock Road this turn. Anderson and Banks. You can see that Anderson has turned to the north after reaching White Plains, and that Banks has now reached Middleburg and has began to turn to the east towards Aldie. And then lastly, Stewart and Farnsworth. Stewart has turned to the north after going through, I think that's the Hopewell Gap there, and Farnsworth is turned to the south after going across the Bull Run Mountains, and they appear to be on a collision course somewhere west of the mountains. Moving ahead now to the 4 a.m. turn, you will see that there has been some light skirmishing between Baird and Robertson, and a few more casualties for both sides, but nothing serious. Beardsley is back. Well, thank goodness, because he was missed. He is now directly behind Baird's brigade in a supporting position, and he's back where he should have been in the first place, along the Braddock Road. But now, Farnsworth. Where are you going? He started off south along the mountain road and has reversed course back to the north. I don't understand why. The mountain road seems to be the most obvious place that you would want to picket. Instead, he has left a single regiment there and is heading back north towards the turnpike. But I don't know why. Had the Federals sent 2 brigades to the west, I think they'd have a lot more options right now, and they'd have the ability to picket numerous roads. But with only 1 brigade, you're kind of stuck trying to figure out how you're going to disperse a limited number of cavalry units over numerous roads, and it's going to be a problem. He did leave the 1st Vermont along the mountain road, and I guess they're going to picket that road against any Confederate forces which move north against it. For the Confederates, Jones's division has fallen out of line, and they are leaving 2 brigades at White Plains. And this is a smart move. Jones has Anderson's brigade at Georgetown, and he has the rest of his division at White Plains building defenses there. The Confederates don't know if the Federals are advancing along the western side of the map, and so they're going to play it smart until daytime comes and they can see what's going on around them. Using Jones in a defensive nature is a good move here at the very beginning of the game. Moving forward now to the 4:20 a.m. turn, end of turn number 7, you will see over here in the east that King's division and Winder's division are approaching one another along the Braddock Road. There's going to be conflict there, but right now neither side can see one another in the limited visibility of dawn. Robertson's brigade and Baird's brigade have done a very good job of picketing that road, so neither side can see what the other is up to beyond their cavalrymen. In the north, Banks is still moving. He's going towards Aldie. He's making some good progress. And there's been a little bit of contact along the mountain road and the middle road as the Confederate Tin-Man skirmishing scouting units have moved forward. Stewart is making progress, and he's bringing a lot of cavalrymen to an area where there is no real Federal cavalry force to stop him, because Farnsworth is way up here, and now he's going back towards Aldie. So again, I'm not sure where he's going, but the entire western side of the map is void of any significant Union cavalry, and that's going to be a problem. All right, moving ahead to the 4:40 a.m. turn. we will now notice that King and Winder have deployed their forces. And since this is the last turn of dawn, let's go ahead and zoom in here and take a look at what they're doing. Looking at the map here, you can see that Robertson's cavalry brigade is screening the Confederate advance while Baird's is screening the Federal advance. And both are doing a very good job of preventing the other side from seeing what's beyond their position. Just behind Baird's brigade, Beardsley's brigade has gone into a position there. And behind Beardsley, King's infantry division is beginning to move into position. All of this is occurring outside of the sight of the Confederate lines. And the Federals really have a good defensive option here. Their artillery is emplaced along good ground, and they've got some forests and some ridges to use on either flank. So I really like the Federal position right now. The question is whether or not they're going to use it defensively or be aggressive and attack the Confederates. Approaching from the south is Winder's division. Winder's division is along the Braddock Road here, and they are stacked up. They can't see, like I said, the Federal infantry coming down the road from the north, but they can see Baird's cavalry brigade aligned in front of them. And I think that's going to make them super aggressive because they're going to see all that cavalry and think, that's a lot of points if we can get our infantry in line and attack their mounted cavalry. The issue for the Confederates, though, is that there's no good defensive ground here where they are currently located. And they are going to want to attack to try to reach this ridge where the Federals have all their artillery. The problem that they don't know they're about to face is that King's division is right there. All right, coming back to this main overhead map, we're going to see that Stuart is making more progress as he moves along the middle road and towards Middleburg. Just to the south of him, Anderson has gone to the right. I thought Anderson was going to go towards Middleburg. I guess I was wrong. He's actually turned onto the mountain road and is going to take the direct route towards Aldie, it appears. Sigel is arriving. Sigel's corps is now mostly on the map, arriving from the northeast, and they're heading towards Gilbert's Corner. While in the south, Hood is moving north. Hood has reached White Plains and has bypassed Jones's division and is now moving along the line directly behind Anderson's division. So that brings me to the end of the 4:40 a.m. turn, and that's a good point to stop just before we hit daybreak. So what am I looking forward to in the next episode of this series? Well, which side will attack along the Braddock Road? The Federals have a better position, and I don't think they're going to attack. But the Confederates have nowhere to defend along that road, so I think they're going to be more aggressive and try to attack north against the Federal cavalry and then against those artillery pieces they can see along that ridge. Which direction will A.P. Hill move? Is he going to follow Jackson north along the Braddock Road to create a much larger force, or is he going to turn to the west and join Longstreet for an advance against Aldie and Middleburg? Will Stuart capture Middleburg? I don't know. Right now, Middleburg is undefended, and it seems like Stuart can just ride in and take the town. We're going to find out in the next episode. All right, everyone. Thanks for watching. I do appreciate your patience. I know this was a little bit longer than anticipated, but I hope you enjoyed it and had some fun. And I promise that future episodes are going to be much shorter than this one. Have a good day, and I will see you next time.